I'd like to introduce our two panelists today. Matt Barrow is the Director of Differentiated Learning for Baltimore City Public Schools. With over 13 years of experience, he, like many, had started out as a teacher, ELA and social studies in middle school for 7 years, and after becoming the district's MTSS coordinator in 2018. He's in prior roles as the academic tutoring coordinator. He's designed and overseen the district's high dosage tutoring initiative, and which has supported over 15,000 students in 2024-2025 across 129 schools. I've had lots of conversations with Matt. He's, because of the sheer volume of tutoring and how many tutoring programs are happening at any given time within Baltimore City Public Schools, he's become a real expert at overseeing the data related to that activity. And then my next guest is Jason Godfrey, the Director of Data Science at Accelerate, appointed through Harvard University's Strategic Data Project. Jason specializes in transforming complex data into actionable insights with clear progress metrics. His pioneering research uses natural language processing tools on custom data sets of student essays to identify the semantic and lexicogrammatical features most rewarded by institutions. This work helps post-secondary policymakers recognize and adapt the linguistic functions promoted by their institutions. And I know, Jason, you can tell me how close. I think your PhD is like weeks away at this point at the University of Michigan.
I defend the day after tomorrow.
Okay. Oh my gosh. Good luck. I'm sure you'll do great. Awesome. So I think that the overall arc of what we originally planned to do for this panel was to talk to Jimmy first a bit about like, hey, what is it like to kind of have the elegance of you're running one huge tutoring program across the district and you've kind of uniformed it. Now, that doesn't mean that the data set is not, is not complex, but it means that there is sort of this elegance to being able to kind of have a fairly clean set of assessment data and a fairly clean set of tutoring data and being able to merge it and visualize it. And then we go over to, so that was the first part of the story. The second part of the story, we're going to pass to Matt. And so we're going to start with Matt because as I mentioned before, Matt is in a very heavily populated district, very diverse, socioeconomically very kind of diverse across the entire district, and lots of sets of problems and lots of sets of things to solve, many different schools, lots of Title I schools, as I'm sure Matt will speak to, and then lots of programs that are necessary at that level of volume. So Matt, from your perspective, managing these multiple programs across Baltimore, how do you ensure value and efficacy in data collection? And as you think about best practices and progress monitoring techniques, how do you think about like articulating that to our audience, how you go about all of that?
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. Again, Matt Barrow, Director of Differentiated Learning for Baltimore City Schools. Just quick, put it into the universe. Well, wishes for Jimmy. I actually just sent him an email. I hope he's okay. Wow. And Jason, yeah, good luck on the defense, man. That's gonna be a relief when it's over. But Nate, thanks for having me here. And to your question, we went from 0 to 60 real fast here. At the first year, once ESSER funds were put out into the universe, and our district decided to really invest heavily in high impact tutoring, call it high dosage tutoring at the time, even still, right? We were a little ahead of the game in terms of the data collection and kind of understanding what are the things we need to at least have visibility on to be able to manage the work. So to answer your question, I'm going to actually go back in time a little bit to 2019. So prior to the pandemic, we got some state funding that came in per some legislation that was mandated for districts in the state of Maryland to use to provide supplemental instruction for students identified as below level in reading or math in grades K to 3. And so we took that and we actually built a homegrown tutoring model, built the entire thing from scratch, but made sure it was aligned to our core instruction. So for K to 2, we went with foundational literacy. And so, for that particular grade band, our districts used and still uses Foundations as the core foundational reading curriculum. So we aligned it to that. We took the intervention component. And so there were some key pieces there, in terms of the model, the dosage, immediately understood before we even started hiring and implementing. It was, we have to understand if kids are getting to this intervention or not. And so creating some tools to be able to monitor all that. For the tutors themselves, we didn't even call them tutors at the time. Like tutoring was not the word. We just called them interventionists. But it's the same thing. Building tools where they would all enter that daily data. And so just having a simple system that was coded, having some guidance around how to actually use that and how to just ensure more integrity with how people were using the tools. And not just in terms of, was the kid there or not, but also, there was a comment earlier around understanding the reasons why if a kid wasn't there. That was built into our very first iteration of this too. So from that very early phase in just a limited subset of our schools where we piloted this and have been able to grow it over the years, that piece around data collection was really front and center in my brain. And so, just being thoughtful about, what does the tool look like? Is it easy for the people to use? Is it going to give us the right visibility that we need to be able to see? But to your question around how do you ensure the quality of that, especially now we've gone to a much, much larger scale. So with thousands and thousands and thousands of students getting tutoring during the school day, but from this really varied kind of network of vendors, the vast majority of the tutoring that happens is provided by right now 17 different vendors in the district, in addition to our homegrown model, which is still really running incredibly strong right now. So we still use the tools that improved tools along the way that we implemented with our homegrown model. That those are still being used there, that give us that really granular level of data. And so that's kind of one component of it. And so to ensure the quality and the fidelity and the reliability and the validity of that, we have program managers that work on our team that they really do a great job working regularly with those tutors and looking at that data, in every one of their check-ins that they have with them every single month, to just really do those quality checks and to make sure that, oh, you're actually, I see on this day, you mark this kid here, but if they're at a field trip or whatever, mark it like this. So that kind of technical support along the way has been really helpful there. In the larger space, we have a much more generic way to track the data. And I'll be the first one to shout as loudly as possible that it is not ideal, but it at least gives us the visibility broadly to know how well things are being implemented at each school by each vendor. And so to just really ensure the quality of the data that comes into that system, it's kind of the same deal. Our tutoring team meets monthly with our vendors. They start every single one of those meetings by looking at that data for that program across, at the program level, and then looking by school to really drive that conversation. And so it's in those conversations where you have that same kind of troubleshooting or technical support that our team is able to give to our vendors to ensure that, oh, wait, you're collecting the data in this way. Actually, let's go back to our guidance. This is how we need everybody to start norming around just the day-to-day practices around collecting that data. We have work to do. And again, I'll be the first one to acknowledge that and just to advocate for that. And, it leaves gaps that we're continuing to grapple with. But just having the regular cadence of data coming in and being able to get people more and more normed on how they're tracking that. And some do a really, really great job of that. And it really comes through, not just in their implementation, but when we see middle of year outcomes most recently, it's there's almost a direct line between the programs that have gotten really good at just managing that piece and making sure that the support is getting to drive a better implementation in those schools across that program, and those outcome datas. So it's really, I think it's been a lot of kind of labor going into all of that over the past several years, but, we're in a place now where there's a very tight cadence of, check-ins and visibility on the data points that help drive those supportive conversations. And there's still work to do around ensuring the validity and the quality. And honestly, for the broader tutoring landscape we have with our vendors, that gold standard of the daily student participation, the reasons why they're absent, that really granular or detail, not devil. I guess the devil's in the details, and we don't have all the details, so maybe it is the devil. I don't know.
Definitely, it can be a devil.
Yeah. But I mean, that was a long answer to your question, but
No, it's
yeah.
okay. And one of the things, like, just kind of going below the surface a lot, right? One of the things we deal with quite a bit in sort of pulling all this outcome data together, or just being a partner and accumulating that data for stakeholders, whether it's at the state level, district level, or whether it's to funders like Accelerate, is the complexity of sometimes having different assessment tools, different grade bands that are being, you're looking at maybe similar assessment tools, but in a different way. Your focus here on ELA and math, right? Math can have subscores and all this other stuff. So I'm curious how you deal with the complexity of differentiated tools for assessment and differentiated, like, thinking about outcomes between ELA and math.
Yeah, so this is a very timely question right now too. So again, like to answer this question, I gotta back it up and just really start with our homegrown model. Like that's just where we have the most impact, the most influence, the most control. And so that piece we've actually been able to do incredibly well. Like built tools to monitor the academic progress. They progress monitor using standardized, or not standardized, but well, I guess it is standardized, but it's the probes within the Tier 2 Foundations program. They give those to every kid every 2 weeks. And we have that data coming in live. And so having that visibility, it becomes so incredibly valuable and predictive of how kids are actually going to then score on that diagnostic. And that diagnostic is, there's a degree of predictiveness for how they're going to do, down the road on their state tests, especially we're talking K-2, so they don't start actually taking the state test until grade 3. But so like having that piece really tight in that space has been incredibly valuable, not just in terms of like that predictive feature, but for the ability of our team and then the people in schools to really like dig deep on the practices around that and ensure fidelity of not just like our kids getting there, but like how well is the instruction happening? It gives such a deeper lens into that component. And so it's a timely question for that broader landscape, because that's something that we have continued to grapple with, just because there's so much variability in like what people are focused on within ELA or within math, right? It's like we focused on like grades 4 and 5 in one school, but the same program may be focusing on grades 9 and 10 in another. And so just there's this high degree of variability. And so the conversation, like we were literally having on Monday afternoon I was having with my tutoring coordinator around this topic was, how can we think about, just because we're all working towards the same standards in every single grade level. So how could we design a system that is, whether it's just a little exit ticket that's aligned to like some power standards, like at a certain frequency, and be able to track that data just to get that formative pulse on, our kids being responsive. And so a way to score those in a normed, unified way, that data can be input. So whether you're working on certain things in one grade level or another, we're really just measuring standards. And so that's where our thinking is right now. Still work to do there, but I think it's a really just exciting topic for me just to grapple with personally, because there is a solution to this. I really do think it lives in how we are measuring progress towards standards and seeing by individual student, is their trajectory towards meeting those standards. If it's every 2 weeks, every 4 weeks, whatever that cadence is, are we seeing growth or are we not? Because then that just does the same thing as what we do with our homegrown program around. Then we can actually talk about the practices that are happening in those groups with those tutors and in terms of like their instruction and all of those pieces. So like that's where we are right now. But yeah, that is the question to ask.
So, and I'd love to kind of help. This slide in particular kind of grabbed my attention when I was looking over your slides prior to this. I'd love you to talk to this slide a little bit, because I think it's really powerful.
Yeah, so at the onset of our recovery plan, after we're coming back from the pandemic, our district, it's not going to be a one thing is going to fix all the challenges that time period brought on, right? And so it was really around this investment in multiple strategies across the board. So, you know, you see them listed across there. So like wellness, school culture and climate, learning acceleration, personalized learning, how we use our time, how we're expanding access to other opportunities. And so kind of take our district really like was strategic and thoughtful about how do we take this holistic approach that is providing multiple pathways to recovery and to really the support that our kids have needed all along. And so just tutoring being one of those strategies. I will say tutoring is by far the largest investment strategy that our district decided to pursue. You know, it's been over $75 million since 21-22 that our district has allocated from ESSER and other funding sources for this work.
Yeah.
But just, you know, trying to think about everything in that whole experience about like, you know, where kids are. Not every kid's in the same place. There's a vast variety of needs. So like the strategies listed here are just, you know, what was kind of prioritized to provide that holistic experience and really to individualize how we're able to support every kid in the district.
Yeah, like the next slide I love because this one is really just talking about that. Like this is a badass slide. The next one showing this tutoring enrollment, you know, and I know like it can come and go, but that like 22-23 number is just awesome.
Yeah. And we actually had set a goal for this year to try and hit around 18,000. We ended up having to kind of like tweak that quite a bit because one of our partners they actually shifted, and this was at the request of someone above my pay grade, to shift from virtual to in person. So it really limited the number of students that we were able to support. And it's been a good shift because like they're getting better results now because of it, interestingly.
Right.
But yeah, like so this slide definitely tells that story of, you know, we started really small in 19, but then like it just exploded in 21-22, and just really proud of the work that the team's been able to do to just drive not just the enrollment numbers, but yeah, this one, like just the attendance figures and really
That's bananas, dude.
yeah,
To think that this, I
yeah.
mean, to think that, you know, I watched the school a season of The Wire, I guess, and I'm thinking about the fact that you're getting close to 80% attendance for Baltimore City School tutoring. Dude, that is incredible. That's really incredible. And like, how do you equate, like, I mean, and when there's this big question of AI, we're talking a lot about AI, but I mean, do you equate these kinds of attendance numbers to like the relationship piece that these kids are being kind of like connected on an individual level? I mean, maybe that's optimistic, but I'm curious what your thoughts are, what the data says there.
Yeah, no. So we actually we survey our students every year, and overwhelmingly, like that relationship piece, you know, that comes through, you know, in the positive responses to those particular types of questions. You know, I don't think we've had a single partner that's been below 89% positive response rate when it comes to that relationship piece. So I mean, there's certainly something to that. But what I'll draw you into here is, so again, like school year 1920, they got little asterisks there. Like that was when we first started in just our limited pilot. And we launched in January of 2020. And then the pandemic hit in
Crazy
March.
time.
It was a very short window, but we were
Yeah.
off to a good start. Obviously 2021 was virtual. 21-22, that was the first year of, okay, we're implementing at a huge scale now. And so you know, I kind of came into helping to manage the district-wide implementation at that point. So I was able to bring that kind of like data system lens into it. And so there really wasn't anything at the outset to measure this. We were able to kind of cobble it together by the end, but we were able to really determine, you know, 54.7% attendance that first year. So it was really around, we have to make sure that you know, we're not talking about anything else with our partners except for like these numbers right here. Because if we're not getting kids the intervention, it doesn't matter what you want to argue about or whatever, right? So it's like being really intentional between 21 and 22. The shift was, okay, we built a data system to start being able to track this in a normed way. We brought all of our partners together in person in Baltimore and like just laid it out. This is our goal. Last year we were 54.7. This year our goal is going to be 74.7, a 20 percentage point increase. We got really close.
Yeah.
But then the shift was, rather than having monthly meetings where it was just kind of this, kind of more open agenda about like, what are we going to talk about? It's like, nope, we're going to start every conversation right here. And then having that visibility on the data by every school that program was working with, then we're able to have honest conversations, right? You're not trying to convince me that things are going well or not going well. We're just looking at data and then having a more open and transparent conversation. And so like, I really attribute the dramatic increase, like from 21-22 to 22-23 to that sustained practice, that was absolutely based on our ability to finally have like some visibility at the right levels for this particular metric.
Yeah, Matt, this has been so awesome. We're gonna pop up a level now and talk a bit more across the country, state level with Jason. Before we do that, I wanna pop in a quick poll. We're trying to get some more and more interaction from our audience. So if we could put a poll up, that would be awesome. There we go. And again, Jason and Matt, you can't answer it because of bias, or something. All right. So Jason, let's go to the next slide too. Jason, for you, like at Accelerate, I'm just thinking how these tutoring programs at the district and state level, how are they using data to demonstrate their effectiveness to stakeholders and funders? What type of data are most compelling for securing and expanding funding? Like how is Accelerate thinking about this more broadly? And for those of you who are not aware, I think of Accelerate as this kind of, and you can correct me, Jason, but I've always thought of it as like this, hey, let's create this one organization that can be the litmus test for all of these philanthropic groups that want to make large investments in education. Gates, Arnold, Griffin, Walton. Okay, let's put money together and let's get some really strong leadership in this tutoring thing to see how we want to invest that money for best effectiveness. So let's turn it over to you to talk about that.
Yeah, and just looking at the results of this poll, integrating data from multiple sources being the biggest challenge. I mean, that is exactly, I can skip the presentation. That's exactly what I was going to talk about. And I'll get to the question. So just to give an overview of like my perspective of this, thoughts to Jimmy, hope he gets well soon, and Matt, who has like this really great perspective on what the work is like on a day-to-day setting and what it looks like in a school, in a district. I sit kind of like 30,000 feet in the air, where I see it from lots of different perspectives at a high level, but I don't necessarily get that same like close view. So I think that it's good to get the balance of perspectives. And also, before I jump in, I just want to say thanks to Liz, Amanda, and Alex in the AI session. I thought that was incredible. Like, I wish I had been recording that or could get a recording later or something.
Yeah, we got a recording. Don't worry, everyone. All of this is recorded. So even if you want to share it with folks that didn't get to attend, we'd love for it to be spread out there for the community of practice.
Yeah, I thought that was great. So just a quick little bit about who I am, what I do. I work as the director of data science from Accelerate, as was mentioned earlier. We have grantees, or in the last grant year, we had 21 states, 648 schools. And then I also have another perspective, which is through the Strategic Data Project at Harvard. In the next slide. And what we do there is that gives me access to another 37 states and 95 districts, or perspectives from those states and those districts. And so while I don't have the same ground level expertise, I do get to see sort of the 30,000 feet in the air perspective. And what I see coming right off of the poll is data silos exist at every level. There's the provider level, the researcher level, the school level, the district level, the state level. And all too often, these data silos store information that's not mutually accessible from one to the other. So in effect, there are all of these data fiefdoms within a single school, a district, or a state that don't talk to each other. Oh, sorry. And the problem with that is that it leads to, it's a huge block for data transparency, and it creates duplicated effort across these different levels, which leads to downstream issues such as inconsistent reporting, security risks, compliance issues, and overall reduced efficiency. And like I said, as we can see from the poll, I mean, this is not new information to you all either. And then I think even on top of the data silos that exist across every level, and I think that this is the part where the situation becomes really tricky, is that how those data silos interoperate varies by locale. So in the next slide, what I've got is like a so compressed version of how data silos somewhat interoperate at the state level for the 5 states that we're most closely working with. That, I mean, it's so compressed that it's practically useless. But even in this highly compressed version, we can see that the way that the data silos are interoperating is different enough per locale that there's no one way to say, okay, here's the right way to implement a tutoring program. Here's the things you need to do. Here's what we're looking for. Just go out, follow these best practices, and you're going to be okay. Because every locale has different operating procedures that need to be attended to. And so while there are best practices as far as principles go, what it actually looks like within your situation needs to be tailored as idiographically to what is going on in your district, in your state, as much as can be expected. That said, something that we've done at Accelerate that I think can sort of help maybe open those conversations or help you introspect is we've created a state field guide that can help you introspect. It has some checklists that help you think about your data collection protocols and the ways that you can tailor them to your specific situation. And that QR code on the screen takes you specifically to the section that talks about data collection, but you can go over the whole thing. And on top of this, and if it's useful for you, that's great. I hope it is. If it's not, feel free to reach out to me and tell me what we could do to help make it more useful. Is I would just like to shout out the other participants here. I know that in the breakout room, I took like a screenshot of the other people who were there because I know that I have so much to learn from the other people who were speaking. And I think that like this community can also be another way to sort of, if not break those data silos, because that requires data sharing agreements, that requires memorandums of understanding, a way to sort of peek over the fence at what the other people in the room are doing and the ways that you can swap best practices, if not actually share data. And then I guess if I could answer your question specifically, Nate, from the beginning, I think that there are probably 3 main axes that are the most important in respect to what are the ways that you can create or show a tutoring program that is successful. And this could be to funders, this could be to administrators in your state or district. And this isn't to say that these are the only axes. These are to say these are the ones that, from my perspective, I would try to optimize for. And those are scalability, rigor, and human-centered design. So scalability doesn't always mean like 100 million students in 30 seconds. Sometimes what that can mean is, do we have a way to get more tutors in the room if we need them? Do we have a way to get more instructional materials in the room if we need them? Obviously, in the case of a district or a specific school, there's like a cap on the level of scalability that you can have, but making sure that you're able to meet that cap wherever it's at with a high level of fidelity is incredibly important.
Yeah.
And then the second one, rigor, the tiers of evidence. I think that that's the direction to look to, is to show what you're doing within your specific intervention is being reported in such a way that the impacts of it are above question, that it can't be attributed to some other variable. So obviously ESSA tier 1 is an RCT. If you can get an RCT through, do it.
Yeah.
I mean, that's obviously much easier said than done, because no parent is going to say, well, my kid who is a student who needs tutoring is randomly not going to get tutoring. I mean, that's something that no parent wants to hear.
Yeah, and
So
I also think that's why we see so many QEDs over RCTs. Like, I think it's hard unless you have a lab school or something like that. And just in general, talked a lot about just bridging, bridging evidence to practice in general is hard because, I mean, to reach that level 1 level of ESSA evidence, it necessitates something as rigorous as an RCT, and sometimes like within contexts for which something might be working really well, just working through the DSAs of being able to run an RCT within that environment are almost impossible.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons at Accelerate we see this as there are different stages. Obviously, when you're first starting out, you might not have the capacity to run an RCT. You might not have the funds to pay a third-party firm who could run an RCT firm to do it for you. And you also might be iterating on your model in such a way that you don't want an RCT yet, which is a difficult and expensive thing to run. Maybe you just want for now some correlative results that are going to show you a direction of how to improve, and
yeah,
that's okay for spinning up. But once you're ready to say, I have something, I know it works, I want to show the world, that's the time to go towards like a higher tier of evidence. And
yeah,
I think that leads really well into the third point, which is a human-centered design. So it's great to have papers that show how much tutoring you're doing and how many students that helps. I know that for me, one of the most valuable things that I do at Accelerate is actually go to the schools and do the site visits and see the students, and having a human-centered approach, knowing that in your organization, even the data person who would love to just sit behind his computer all day and look at nothing other than a screen and not interact with people, has actually gone to a school and shook hands with tutors and watched students as they realize, oh, if two bells go walking, the first one does the talking, and like in 30 minutes learn this huge literacy concept that's going to change their life.
right.
I think that idea of the human-centered design, even though it might not be on the front page of this is how to scale your tutoring, I do think that it's incredibly important.
Yeah, so I want to take a question from an audience that will kind of lead back to this, but I want to kind of pass that question to Matt because I think it'll be helpful to kind of set the on the ground and then move it maybe up a level again. And that question, which is a little broad, but so Matt, and as you think about your stakeholders, right? And I'm sure in many ways you think of your stakeholders as also sort of the purse string holders. Like, yeah, I want to keep doing this. I want to keep transforming Baltimore City Public Schools through this sort of relationship-based learning approach. So, as you collect this data and you think about the purse strings, what data, and this is an audience question, what data has been most important for you to show funders to help secure that additional or sustainable funding? I think you talked to attendance, but maybe kind of take it a little bit deeper there.
Yeah, I mean, so the student outcome data on our district assessments, I mean, I think that's probably the primary driver of those conversations. We just, as of I think the week before last, finished up a big round of planning for next school year, where we that was like the number one data point that kind of drove the decisions for which programs are we going to continue in which schools to what extent.
Yeah.
Because ESSER funding liquidation, there we have a very tight timeline, and have to have all this ready to go so that it's encumbered and all that. And we have a smaller budget to work off of next year, and so trying to design a data-driven decision-making process that could be applied, across the board. Student outcomes was the big one. So like the questions that we asked in that process to decide which programs to continue. The first one was, did the program have, overall positive impact as evidenced by the student outcomes on their district diagnostic assessments? So we looked at our middle of year data from this year as well as our end of year data from last year to kind of like have just multiple points. And, we don't have our end of year data just yet, which that stinks because we have to do all this work now to get all the requisitions and everything in. And so, but like, best case scenario we could do is like, let's at least look at multiple data points. So starting with overall, if the answer to that is yes, then go to the next level. The answer is no, then we ask a little deeper question. Did they have any demonstrated positive outcomes in particular grade levels. So then, maybe it wasn't across the board, but where they actually showed a lot of effectiveness in 4th grade, for example. It's like, okay, all right, so now that gets us more targeted about where to continue those things, right? And so it's that plus just some qualitative implementation pieces as well. Certainly we did look at attendance as one of those considerations. We looked at things like certain reporting practices that we have to rely on our partners to be able to do in a timely manner. So even like those actions that they take, we kind of measured that throughout the year, and the team did a great job kind of putting together a system to do that. But so yeah, like really starting with those outcomes as the primary decision point, but then going through this process with this series of other kind of if or questions. So yeah, just taking into account the quantitative outcomes as well as the qualitative things around implementation, and as well as like consistent behaviors and things like that we needed to ask of our vendors.
Yeah, it's so crazy. We're getting so many questions. So I'm going to try to keep the thread, but I'm going to go to Jason. So Jason, another question from the audience that kind of truncates over to you is as you think about sort of the funding perspective, right? Okay, we're a group of philanthropies that are thinking okay, this could be a really promising way to transform education in our country. And obviously you just heard Matt talk about the kinds of data that he thinks about when he's thinking about the purse strings. But the question is basically, what data points do funders such as Accelerate care the most about? I know that's pretty broad, but yeah, I'd love to hear what your thoughts are.
This is a difficult
Oh, it's
question.
difficult.
This is a very difficult
You probably
question.
have a lot of people who have also put in call to effective actions on this, so I don't want to put you on the spot, but
Yeah, well, I mean, yes, probably. I think that the best way to answer this question is probably cost-effective impact. And cost-effective impact in the context of the neighboring areas or the neighboring students within those schools. So it's not just to say, oh, this school that is, primarily resourced by or primarily drawing from upper middle class students recovered from the pandemic really quickly. And there's also a tutoring program. I mean, without the tutoring program, a well-resourced school in a very high tax bracket neighborhood is probably also going to do well. So you need to show, is this doing well, not just because, but in part because of the tutoring program, to show not only that improvements are happening, that there's impact being made, but that the tutoring program is central to that. And like I said, I think that if you can come into that with some sort of an academic mindset, and that's not to say an academic study, mind you, because sometimes those studies, I mean, between submission and publication, it can take 2 years. I mean, I got 2-year-old studies waiting for a response from the editor right now.
Yeah, I wonder how much you're just looking at the data and going, I can just look at this data right now. I don't even have to have them answer the question as to whether they're ready for an RCT. I can look at their current data and I can tell you they're a million years away from being able to put together a trial of that level of rigor to prove that our funders are ready to double down.
Well, and this is so difficult because if you're just barely starting and you know that you have an idea for a cool model that hasn't been tried yet, and you're trying to bring together funding, we don't want to exclude that either, because innovation is a huge part of this. That's what the whole AI thing was about, is that there are new ways to do tutoring now that could be more effective than all the traditional ways before. And if we're waiting until, oh, you have to have an RCT before we even look at you, then we're leaving a lot of innovation on the table. And so that's why, for Accelerate, there are the different pools where there's the innovation grantees that don't require as much statistical rigor, but do require a higher level of innovation as far as the model goes. So that's why it's a difficult question to answer plainly, because high levels of innovation in the model are also highly valued. But if there's not a high level of innovation on the model, then evidence for great impact that is actually based from the tutoring program.
Yeah, so we have another question in the same realm, which is, breaking it down to, joint budget committee, bill sponsors, education committees. I mean, I remember getting the governor here in the state of Virginia's like, this is what I'm expecting for the programs that you guys are helping out. And it was like, in better attendance rates in schools and, these like macro things, right? Improve NAEP scores, all of that kind of thing. So, going back to you, Matt, there's a question here in regards to attendance that I think is really interesting, which is like, for the attendance rate, as you think about it, what counts as an absence? So student not being in school, student teacher keeping them in class. We try to track like in Pearl, like all the differentiated versions of this, but I'm curious as you're thinking about it, particularly as you're reporting.
Yeah, I mean, that's a simple one. It like clear as day in our guidance for this. And, especially like this is how we started tracking it day one with our internal model years ago. If they're scheduled to have a session and they weren't there, whether they're at school or not, it's an absence.
Yeah.
Yeah. I also, Jason, like you mentioned, going back to the previous question just for a second, like around cost effectiveness, and just want to like share this with the other, people that are thinking about this from a district or state lens as well. One of the decision points around, which programs do we fund, right? Like, especially if we've been implementing, like that's another thing to really consider is that cost effectiveness. And that's something we just included in ours that I didn't mention. But like the question of, did they produce similar results to models that did not cost as much as them, right? Because if the answer to that is yes, then, well, why do we need to continue to pay twice as much for this program if this other one was producing the same amount of results? So I mean, that's a critical factor as well. But as far as the attendance piece, yeah, I mean, like really, it's if they were scheduled to have it and they didn't come for whatever reason, whether it was a fire drill or a field trip, or they were homesick from school, like we have to be able to measure that, and like being able to differentiate the reasons why. That helps with the conversations after to help drive and improve implementation, whether that's with the actual program itself or with the administrators or the people at the school that are supporting the implementation. Because one school, if we're seeing we're seeing a big trend in kids are missing because the like this is big in our internal model, because you're pulling the tutor to do lunch duty or something like that. That's an easy conversation to have, but knowing if that's happening or not, it really does come down to what are they scheduled to get, and did they get that or not, and if not, why?
Yeah, I mean, I just obviously I'm constantly sort of keeping my finger on the pulse of RFPs that are coming out, particularly of like heavily populated places. I think Boston and Philly both just put out pretty robust RFPs. I can't remember which one of them, but one of them is an OBC, an outcomes-based contract. Jason, like I'm curious, like how you think about that, like how Accelerate is thinking about OBC, how you're thinking about like looking at all of these different programs and not just having the incentive for them to like move the needle, but them as the incentive in the first place to collect the data that they can show that they're moving the needle.
Yeah, I think that whether a specific implementation of OBC is effective or not, just in case somebody's had like maybe up for debate, but I think that the general principle of OBC, which is for an outcomes-based contract, a tutoring provider will be paid based off of a pre-agreed upon amount of effective interaction. So it's like if your I guess I don't know if I need to explain OBC very much, but the idea is if they deliver on their promises, if the provider delivers on their promises, then they get paid, and if they don't deliver on their promises, then they get paid less. And I think that's a great idea. If for no other reason, then it requires the data about intervention, about impact, about attendance to be collected. I mean, in a perfect world, that would be collected anyway. But in this imperfect world, sometimes that's not collected. So
Yeah.
I think that in as far as it leads to greater data collection about fidelity, that leads teachers, tutors, administrators to be able to make more informed decisions that help the students more. At the end of the day, that's what it's about. It's about the kids. Then I'm all for it.
Yeah.
If I could, I'm
Go
sorry, if I
ahead.
could add to that too, real quick.
Yeah.
I think from the district side, I love this idea because it's not just did the vendor get outcomes or not. It also creates accountability for the district to make sure that it's being implemented well and like helping to remove those barriers. Because if there are thresholds around, certain support and things that can get to schools from the district side to actually support that implementation, if like certain thresholds around that aren't met, then the vendor can still get paid, right? Like what that initial amount was, which actually is really helpful from the district perspective because it gives, centrally as a district administrator, gives me something else to like really put a stake around the ground with like school leaders and people that are actually in schools. It's like, look, the district, we're going to be wasting money if you and we are not doing our part to actually support and drive like an effective implementation because right. So I just love the idea of like that dual shared accountability as well. So I just wanted to add that.
Yeah, and it's so fascinating because going back to some conversations I've had with Susanna Loeb, one of my favorite conversations I've had with her was just broadly talking about the economics of tutoring, right? So there's one which is like the economics of like transforming it across the country. So that's like the macro level. Like then it's like how can we transform states or districts? But we even got down into the nitty-gritty of like the economics of the 30 minutes that you're with that kid. What does it look like to create the true most powerful shape of care across 30 minutes? Do you get better impact if you spend the first 10 minutes trying to create a connection with that kid, working on the material for 10 minutes, and then spending 10 minutes engaging with them, helping them feel confident about the materials? That may be better than I think what a lot of folks might presume, which is to like, let's get to the material. Let's just master the lesson, right? And so as we think about economics, I'm curious, and maybe this is a question for you, Matt, like this is a question from the audience as well. Do you see more barriers for fidelity in the implementation of high impact tutoring on the vendor side or the district side? And within that context, let's consider the fact that like ESSER is falling off the cliff in September.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And from my seat, the answer is really it depends. Because you can see it going both ways. We have some partners in our district that are, some are community-based, some are larger organizations, but we do have a couple that, they tried to scale too much too fast and they are struggling to manage their own implementation. And it shows up when we are looking at starting with going back to attendance data. The way we have it organized to come in is, we can see it for the entire program, like overall, where are you? But then being able to see it by school at minimum, that tells us, is this a school-based challenge? Because if one school is really struggling, like just with getting kids, but all the most of the other schools are not, and they're actually like at a higher rate, then that focuses the conversation. But we have some that they're struggling across the board, and they have been all year, and it's primarily the main reason why that's happening is, and I'm thinking of two organizations in particular, is because they had a lot of turnover or they tried to scale too much too fast and they're struggling to manage it. The flip side of that is, like we certainly do have a lot of schools that for one reason or another, it might be scheduling, it might be just kind of poor administrative practices happening at the school, and poor systems and structures and things like that. But I mean, so it's the answer is kind of it depends. But I always have to bring it back to answer that question. You have to be collecting this data in an intentional way that's going to give you the right visibility. So whether you have one program or whether you have 50 programs, for every single one of those, you have to be able to answer the question of what's your overall rate of getting kids to the sessions or not. And then is that true across each individual school? And then obviously even better is that true within a school, within certain grade levels or with certain tutors? So having that variability in visibility, that helps solve the problem, whether it's district or vendor based.
Yeah, and we'll have to end there because we've actually gone over because we had so many questions. But I will say, great data and data that we can depend on should also be that data that we build great AI with, right? And sort of bring those two things together, I think is really important. So Matt, Jason, thank you both so much for bringing your perspectives. It's been just like such an amazing conversation. Again, just like the last one, I think it could go on for several hours, but we're going to have to close out today. So I just appreciate your time so very much.
Yeah, and I just want to say, feel free to reach out. I always love to hear from new people to learn new perspectives. So if there's anything that went unanswered, or if there's anything that you'd like to discuss more, because I don't want to imply that I have answers to anything, I'd love to talk more.
Yep.
Ditto.
Awesome. Thank you both so much.